For over 30 years, the team at Hope Store New Beginning Center, along with our clients and community partners, have been building lives without violence in Dallas and Collin counties. If you're in immediate physical danger, please call 911. If you need shelter or would like to talk to someone about receiving our other free services, please call our 24-hour hotline at 972-276-0057 in English or Spanish. At Hope Store New Beginning Center, we offer free trauma-informed services for those affected by domestic abuse, battering intervention and prevention services for those who have abused their partners in the past, and free community education services for any community group or organization. Domestic abuse is a human rights issue that affects a third of all Texans. We empower victims, perpetrators, and community members to live in safety and foster healthy relationships. Please call our 24-hour hotline for help or visit hdmbc.org to learn more about our services. And don't forget to follow us on social media. Hope Store New Beginning Center, building lives without violence. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Looks like we have a good amount of people. Looks like our Facebook live stream is set up. So thank you so much if you're joining us from Facebook. Hello. If you're here on Zoom with us, I can see we have chat available for both platforms. I see my coworker here, Tara Henderson, is actually probably monitoring both chats. So she can send me a message to see if she sees one pop up through Facebook. But you'll constantly see me turn around and my head will focus over here because I have my camera settings and everything in my chat box to my right side, and then I have my actual presentation right ahead of me with my camera. So you'll see a lot of that bouncing back and forth. But again, thank you so much for being here with me today. And my name, for those of you, I see some familiar names in there, but for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Jose Romero, and I'm one of the bilingual community education facilitators here at Hope Store New Beginning Center. And I'm part of the education department. In the education department, we're promoting healthy relationships to empower the community members of all ages to understand and prevent and respond effectively to all forms of abuse. And that's what today's topic is actually going to be, the dynamics of abuse. And we're going to talk about several of the different forms of abuse, what they look like, some of the warning signs and the red flags. But we'll get into that as we progress through today's presentation. But I wanted to give you a quick reminder for those of you who do need CEUs for today's webinar. You can type your name down in the chat box. I would need your name and your email. But then at the end of the presentation, there's also going to be a survey that pops up once the webinar is closed. It's going to pop up and it's going to have a simple survey with information for you to fill out so we can get those CEUs to you. And I'm also going to have one small survey, and this is more for in-house use so we can report numbers, so we know how much of an impact we're doing out there in the community, and so we can report that. So that's going to be about 4 or 5 questions, and that's going to be anonymous, so you can just be honest with me. If you didn't take as much from the presentation, just be honest. It helps me grow, helps me learn, helps me really improve these webinars that we're doing. So it all helps. But let's go again, get started again with what today's webinar is going to look like. And we are going to be talking about, again, the main focus is going to be the dynamics of domestic abuse. So we're going to learn about the characteristics of abuse, the cycle of abuse, why a victim would want to stay in that situation. So why would they stay? We're going to talk briefly about the effects it has on children, some of the warning signs, and red flags of abuse, and the importance of safety planning as well, and how we can help report cases of abuse that we see. So I'm assuming everyone can hear me since I see some of the names popping up on the panelists. So audio is fine. If you don't see if for some reason the presentation starts cutting off or you can't hear me, please feel free to let me know. There's always things still popping up during Zooms that technology might pop up and arise and cause issues. So please feel free to let me know. All right, all good. Awesome. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. And we're gonna touch briefly on early socialization, and how that acts as a barrier really when it comes to these healthy relationships, and when different forms of domestic abuse really make an impact on what society really sets for these genders of what a boy looks like, what a girl looks like, what they should like, what they shouldn't like. And usually when we think about girls, I'll ask a lot of my high school students when I do a presentation in front of them is what color is usually associated with a girl. And like we can see up here in the presentation in the slide, you see pink, and that's usually what I get. But what if a girl just happens to like the color blue? Is there anything wrong with that? It's like absolutely not. But a lot of our teenagers, they'll tell us, society tells us that there's something wrong if this girl likes the color blue instead of the color pink, and the same goes for a boy in that situation. And children are growing up with these different. The society is telling them this is what a boy looks like, this is what a girl looks like, this is how they act, and the moment they stop steering away from those rigid little guidelines that society has set for them, they start hearing those forms of abuse. It's like, well, there's something wrong with this individual because he or she likes this other color, and it opens the door to forms of abuse from their peers and in school. So we're going to talk more about that as we move through and discuss the different forms of abuse. And again, how's a man supposed to act? How's a woman supposed to act? One of the things I ask our students is, what's the one emotion that a man, a boy, is allowed to show? And usually the one answer the first one I always get is anger. It's like they're allowed to, men are allowed to show anger. That's the one emotion that's completely associated with guys. That's the one emotion. They're not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to be sad, depressed, any of that. But anger, that's the one emotion that's perfectly fine. And if you say, what about a woman? Can a woman allowed to show anger? They'll say no, because then she's crazy. She's a bee. There's something wrong with her. She's just crazy. And again, those stereotypes, the gender stereotypes that these students are hearing at the beginning, it really opens the door again to that different forms of abuse that we'll discuss. But I wanted to touch briefly on a few statistics real quick. And 74% of Americans personally know someone that's gone through some form of abuse. And a lot of this abuse, these individuals that go through some form of abuse, they don't outright tell you. They don't tell you, hey, we're at a party together, and they're like, hey, my significant other has been abusing me every single night for the past 6 months. It doesn't sound like that. That's not what these individuals going through that form of abuse really, that's not how they open up to individuals. A lot of it, when we talk about the warning signs, a lot of it is you picking up on some of these red flags that your friend, that your sibling, the family member might be going through. So we're able to pick out some of this information that we're going to discuss, where maybe they're not sharing that information. They didn't tell you that they're being abused, but maybe you can pick up on those signs. So we're going to discuss that here in a bit. And number of American women that go through abuse, it's 1 in 3. So it's a very common issue. We know that men suffer too, which is 1 in 4, but women just suffer at a much higher rates than men. And we're going to discuss a bit more about that. But when it comes to teenagers suffer just about the same. 1 in 3 teenagers. But the unique thing about teenagers is that it's regardless of gender. It's just 1 in 3 teenagers. So we know that both teenagers and women are suffering at very high rates in this situation. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, so usually when I ask this question, it's way better to do it in person to person. But since y'all can hear me, we have a good number of attendees. I'm just gonna ask you. So, if let's say there was 10 teenage girls, and let's say all of them were to just their significant other was to physically abuse them just one time. Out of those 10, how many of them do you think would leave this relationship after being physically abused just once? So just type any number from 1 through 10 that you think in the chat box. And I'll tell you, I was surprised when I first saw the answer to this. I thought it was just insane. I see some of y'all. Okay. I have eight. I have one. I'll tell you right now. I wish it was one. I wish it was that low. Then we know we'd be getting it together when it comes to the situation. But seven, okay. So fortunately, 8 out of 10 girls would stay in that situation. So being in my situation, I took care of my niece when she was growing up, and when I saw this number, seeing that 80% of those girls would stay in a relationship where they're physically abused ones, that literally that scared me, knowing that they would stay in that situation. So I got thinking, like, why though? Why would 80% of those girls stay in situations where they know they're being physically abused? And while we might not see the real reason, there, believe me, there's plenty of different reasons why someone would stay in a situation like that. And we can't be so quick to judge someone because they're staying in this relationship or because they come back, because there's usually a reason that's holding them. And these are just a few, good amount of them, several different reasons that individuals stay in these relationships. Of fear. Fear is one of the main culprits. Why would I want to leave this situation if this person has threatened me? They put that fear into their victims that keep them in that relationship. So of course they're it's not easy for these victims to leave. It might be shame and embarrassment. You see this with men. It's like when they're discussing relationships where they're the ones being abused, why would they want to put that information out there for their friends to make fun of them? Because the people that say they really care about them, that they're always going to be there for them no matter what, they're going to be the same, the very first individuals that make fun of them. So they're not going to want to put themselves out there and seek help from those close to them, because again, it causes that shame, embarrassment, because I'm a man. So how's it gonna look when I tell my homeboys that my girlfriend has been hitting me for the last year in the relationship? I don't want it to taint that image. So that embarrassment, it keeps some individuals from disclosing that information. Same for no family support or financial concerns. Maybe the victim isn't allowed to work. They don't have a source of income, so they're highly dependent on their perpetrator for the income. They might have to they'll have to put up with that abuse, but at the end of the day, the way they're seeing it is, I'd rather have a roof for myself and my kids, because if I leave that situation, where am I going to go? I don't want to go to a shelter. I don't want to get split up with them. I don't want to have CPS involved. So no, of course, I'm going to stay in this situation. So victims, again, they have their own reasons for wanting to stay. And when we hear about these victims, like a lot of the teens we work with, when they see these reasons, like, oh no, this person is still done for staying in that relationship. If it was me, I would just leave. It's not always that easy when it comes to those situations. But let's talk a little bit about what the effects of children who witness that abuse, and what kind of toll it really takes on them in situations. I actually saw some of this abuse growing up when it was me in our household, and I saw what my mom went through. I literally, I felt that powerlessness. I didn't know like how to fix it. I didn't know what to do about the situation. It just felt out of my control, where I couldn't do anything about it. Yet I would see my mom going through that form of abuse, and I felt helpless. I was confused. I was like, was this my fault? Did I do something that caused this kind of abuse? So it would feed into these emotions that we see up here in the slide: that anger, that guilt, that sadness, fear, loneliness, and it all adds up to when a child is seeing that form of abuse. It does add up. And just because maybe the perpetrator isn't directly abusing the child, just being in that scenario where the child is witnessing does really take a toll on these kids. And one of the biggest harms that can come out from that is the normalization of this abuse, because when children are seeing that abuse in a household, it makes them feel like, you know what, this is what all relationships look like. So as they start growing older, that's the mindset they go into these relationships. Well, my mom and dad constantly yelled at each other, or they fought with each other every single night. So that's what this relationship looks like when they become teenagers and they're dating a significant other. They're going to think that's perfectly normal. And girls who young girls who are who witness that abuse from one of their parents going through that abuse are 10 times likely to actually end up in an abusive relationship themselves, whereas young boys who witness that abuse are 6 times likely to actually become the perpetrator when they grow older. So we know it does it makes a serious impact on young children just witnessing that. But some other effects that happen: stuttering, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and these are all things that once these children become much older and they're in their teens, these are all different. Like the depression, low self-esteem, those are all different side effects that they have that the perpetrator or an abusive partner in general can take advantage of to isolate them. So just witnessing that abuse and letting it take a toll on their mental health, and then having that abusive partner that sees that and tells themselves, well, I can, that's one way I can control this individual, just chipping away even more at their self-esteem that's already down here to begin with. So it can affect them as they grow older in that form as well. But then we also have more likely the outcomes that will happen when it comes to witnessing that abuse. They're more likely to drop out of school, abuse drugs and alcohol, so substance in general, become pregnant in their teens, commit violent crimes, and enter into abusive relationships when they become adults. And this is all just from them witnessing that abuse. Again, it wasn't direct abuse towards them, but just being in that household when that abuse happened really does take that impact on them. And I have done another webinar on teaching children interpersonal skills, and I talk about how the dinner table and just having dinner one-on-one, or not even one-on-one, but with one parent at the table, how much of a positive impact that has for children. And it can help revert some of these side effects as a result of the domestic abuse. But I just want to touch on that briefly. And we know that abusive behavior is in an anger management issue. It is in an intoxication issue, and we know that it's never the victim's fault. The victim never did anything, said anything that deserves that type of abuse. And I see we have a question. Will we be able to have a copy of the presentation? Yes, we will. We can send that out afterwards. At the end of the presentation, we can send that out. Abuse is about power and control. So the perpetrator is essentially trying to gain control over this individual to get them to do what they want them to do and bend them to their own will and keep them in this relationship. So they'll use any forms of different tactics to keep this individual to stay in that relationship. And just to touch briefly on pregnancy as well, a lot of people seem to think that the moment a female becomes pregnant, that's going to stop the abuse because now there's a kid involved. This is going to change the individual in that situation. But we know that that also causes much more harm because it takes focus. The mother's focus is now on the baby's well-being and protecting that newborn, or protecting before while she's pregnant. So the focus completely shifts, and perpetrators see that they're losing that control over this individual because the focus is no longer them and what they need, it's what the baby is. So that's another thing I just wanted to sprinkle in there. But we're going to touch here a little bit on the red flags and how you're able to actually see that somebody is abusive, or just pinpoint this out on when maybe a friend, family members that's going through something. You'll be able to pick up on some of those things. And teasing, criticizing someone, playing too rough, embarrassing them in front of others. Like maybe you might be at a party, and the moment his or her friends show up, all of a sudden they need a like play like they're the dominant one, so they'll start making fun of their significant other just to impress their friends in that situation. So just or maybe they're teasing someone, they're calling them by a name, a little nickname that they don't appreciate, and it's been addressed. Hey, I don't appreciate you calling me this or calling me that. But that doesn't stop it. It just, if anything, it escalates the name calling to even more. So just little criticizing like that to an extent, even after it has been addressed. Being two-faced, changing personalities like on a whim. Maybe when we're together, I'm going to be kind and sweet, or I'm going to be abusive rather. But the moment your friends come around, I change it and I'm sweet all of a sudden. And then they leave the scenario and I'm back to being abusive, back to being aggressive and criticizing you about every little thing. So just being that two-faced that doesn't happen overnight. That's clearly taken practice to be just to be able to turn it off and on like a little light switch. So that's one of the bigger red signs, just being able to switch their moods in an instant. Constantly lying, denying fault is somebody that never takes responsibility for any of the situations that might arise, but instead they deflect that and blame the victim themselves for the abuse. If if you didn't say that, you would have been abused. If you weren't wearing that short skirt, I wouldn't have beat you. And it's always the victim's fault and never their fault. So just constantly deflecting that blame. Again, one of the ones we can see. Spreading rumors, breaking promises, just never being consistent when they say they are. Another one of those early ones to see. Making you feel guilty, worthless, using emotional blackmail, whatever form of it that it may be, threatening self-harm. One of the ones we see a lot with our teenagers. If you break up with me, I'm gonna hurt myself. And teenagers are kept in that situation. Well, I don't want this individual to go through that and possibly lose their life in that situation, because then they're going to feel responsible in that setting. So that keeps them in that relationship. Another one of those tactics that you see often, that threatening of self-harm or suicide threats, where it just keeps that individual in that relationship. And of course, no one's going to want that on their conscience. So they feel obligated, like they need to stay or else something bad is going to happen. Another one of the forms that we see. Treating you like a servant, especially in relationships. A healthy relationship is not treating the other one like a servant. It's a two-way street. It's both give and take, and you help each other in that relationship. You establish a positive relationship. You're not treating others like they're your slave, because when you see that in a relationship, you clearly know someone's trying to get that power and control over the other in that relationship. Again, those healthy relationships are a two-way street. And then we see extreme jealousy, possessiveness, accusing you of constantly cheating. So again, when I asked my teenagers about jealousy, I was like, is it cute to see a little bit of jealousy? And people are like, yeah. It's like, but in situations where you're at that party or you're at the gathering, and like, can your significant other talk to other individuals of the opposite gender? And that might arise those like, well, no, not in that situation. If I don't know them, she or he can't talk to them. So being extremely jealous or overprotective, especially in those settings of maybe we're at school together and the boyfriend has his arm around the girlfriend, just holding her tight, trying to keep her safe. Well, what are you trying to keep her safe from? I mean, no one's trying to cause her harm over there. It's more like you're being extremely jealous of everyone, that you're holding on to her like she's your property. Again, being one of those wanting to keep that power and control over an individual, and using that jealousy as an excuse. Is like, oh, he's just a little bit jealous. Just that's just the way that he or she is. And again, that shouldn't be what that healthy relationship looks like. Because what if maybe one day he sees one individual sees the other significant other hanging out with the other individual from the opposite gender, and they don't know the situation. They don't know that they're talking about, let's say, homework, and this individual comes up there to them, and it sets them off, because that extreme jealousy is like, no, my significant other can't be talking to strangers like that. I don't know who they are. Like, get away from her. And might cause one of those situations where physical violence comes into play. Like, we've seen plenty of news reports where situations like that have happened, where they just escalate to physical harm, just because one partner in that situation was extremely jealous in the situation. So that's something, another one of the early red flags to be able to pick up on. And then we also have isolating their victims, isolating you from your support system, from your friends, family, anyone that might be potential help for you, this only helps benefit the perpetrator. And one of the things we tell individuals when they see that their friend, family member, whoever might be is becoming isolated, we ask them to reach out in those situations, because if you're able to keep that line of communication with this individual, maybe they're not ready to leave that situation then and there, but they're going to see, hey, there's someone out there that does care about me, that is trying to stay in touch with me, even though I'm having to deal with my own issues over here. It just gives them that glimmer of hope that there is someone out there that cares. So staying in touch with those individuals that you see that are becoming isolated is very important, because that isolation is only going to benefit the perpetrator, and that's not what we want in that situation. And then we have explosive temper, screaming. This could be punching the walls as well. And just because and then like just because an individual punches a wall and didn't hit the other person in the room, I get it. This person didn't punch you. They punched that wall, and that's considered emotional abuse, because they're threatening your safe space. They're trying to intimidate you, letting you know what they're capable of doing, but not directly hitting you then and there. So it wouldn't be physical abuse in that situation, but it would be emotional abuse as well. Now, here we're gonna discuss the 6 forms of abuse. So we have digital, we have physical, emotional, sexual, verbal, and financial. There is the 6 forms of abuse, and we're going to discuss what those forms of abuse look like. So as far as physical abuse, this is the one that mostly everybody thinks about the moment you say domestic abuse. It's that physical, that punching each other, pulling someone's hair, scratching them, pinching them. So we know what that looks like. And I mean, even that throwing things at someone, causing that physical harm, biting them, using weapons to harm them. Physical abuse is again what we see, the more common one we see. So we know what that looks like. So let's talk a little bit about the other ones, like emotional abuse. And again, that threatening for self-harm, that's one of the tactics that is used, and is that emotional abuse, keeping someone in that situation with that emotional blackmail of threatening self-harm. Maybe it might be we're in the car together, and I'm gonna ignore all the red lights. I'm going to ignore the stop signs. I'm going to go 20 miles over the speed limit just to scare you and intimidate you. That's a form of emotional abuse, causing that distress in that situation. Um, Withholding affection or love as well. It's another form of that emotional abuse that we are seeing as well. Keeping someone from exiting their home, or taking away their keys, so they don't have a form of escape. It just affects that victim emotionally, letting them know that, okay, where do I go? Like, it takes a toll on these individuals. So when we talk with some of the survivors, they tell us all the time that emotional abuse and it's probably one of the hardest things to ever get over, because when it comes to physical abuse, those broken bones, those bruises, those cuts, it all heals. It's all going to heal. But being made to feel worthless, stupid, dumb, ugly, though those words just take a toll on these individuals, and as they move on 20, 10, 15 years later down the road, they still have attachment to that emotional abuse that was caused from their perpetrator. We're going to talk about sexual abuse too. So this is more, we're seeing more, especially, I want to touch a little bit more on this just because it is June, which is Pride Month, but discriminating based on gender is one of the ways that we see that form of sexual abuse, or even threatening to disclose someone's sexual identity. Maybe they haven't shared that they identify as a certain gender, or that they prefer to date a certain gender. With disclosing that information can be seen as that form of abuse as well. Making sexual insults, forcing a partner to try out things that was seen in pornography, and the uh, demanding sex when the victim is unwilling or unable. When consent comes into play, if you have to convince your significant other to have sexual intercourse, the answer is most likely no. And that's what I talk with my high school students in that situation. We talk a lot about consent, 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 because it is extremely important. And I mean that goes for everyone in that situation when it comes to sexual abuse. Consent needs to be there. And just because consent was given one time at the beginning of a relationship doesn't mean the answer is always going to be yes. You need consent in every situation moving forward, because you don't want it to escalate into that form of sexual abuse for the individuals. But this is so these are some of the forms we see here in this slide when it comes to sexual abuse. And then verbal abuse, we see that with threatening, screaming, cursing at someone, name calling them, humiliating them in front of others, or just in general. And this is another one that ties in a lot with that emotional abuse, because it really makes these victims have to go through a lot more than they should, and it sticks with them again years later after they've moved from their situation. It's something that really sticks with them as well. Financial abuse, we're seeing this a lot, but when you have a victim who is working a full-time job, yet they're not able to see any of the money that they've made because the money is going directly to the perpetrator's account, or they have an allowance, they're only allowed a certain amount of money, or they have to even work around the household where they have to do the chores, they have to clean the house, and then they get some sort of compensation from the money that they've already made themselves, yet the perpetrator is the one holding that income. That's when we start to see that form of financial abuse, or just watching what they spend it on, not allowing them to spend the money the way they want to spend it, or on the things that they want to enjoy. But another thing that we see a lot with parents actually financially abusing children is opening up accounts under their name and open up credit cards, because they have that information to start those accounts, and they'll run up bills, and they'll let the kid worry, or their child worry about that situation. So these are just some of the forms that we see when it comes to financial abuse. And then when it comes to digital abuse, who doesn't have either a cell phone, a laptop, internet connection, Wi-Fi connection? This is something that is readily available. So we're all prone to different forms of digital abuse, and so are adults, parents, children. Like, it's just something that's readily available, or not, rather, that we're susceptible to being abused in that form of digital abuse. And in a relationship, what that might look like would be demanding the other individual's password, like putting your fingerprint on their phone to unlock their phone, and having them set that up, constantly going through someone's messages, their texts, or in that situation. But you can also see this digital abuse by setting up trackers on individuals' phones, on their victims' phones, to track them, so I can get the information of where they're at every single point, every single time. And one of the things with digital abuse too, that's just getting scarier, is that if if I went through someone's Facebook that I wanted to stalk, I could right click, save their picture, and I could find where that picture was taken with some simple steps. And people can find and track down people with social media pictures, which leads more into stalking. And our coworker Ryan, he actually does a webinar when it comes to stalking in that situation, with very useful information. But this whole digital abuse, everyone's very susceptible to it, again, because we're always connected online, and it's just something that we need to be very wary about. And I actually didn't post this on my resources, but there's this application for both Android and for Apple Store, called Tech Safety, that can help in situations like that, not just for digital abuse, but any form of abuse where you might be going through something, and can help figure out the next step on how you can find other resources and get help in situations like that. So it's called Tech Safety, and you can find it. It's free to download for both. But one of the other things we wanted to touch on was when might the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship be? And I've had some of the craziest answers. I had this one student tell me it happens between 10 p.m. and 5:55 a.m. or something like that. And I'm like, whoa, that is a very specific answer, but it's usually after the breakup. And you see a lot of friends that mean well tell their partner, their friends in abusive relationships, just leave, just break up with them, just get yourself out of that situation. But we know that that is one of the most dangerous situations because this perpetrator is losing that power and control over their victim, and they'll do anything that they can to regain that power and control over this individual. So the first 2 years are actually when the victim is at the highest chances of losing their life to the perpetrator. So again, when we work with victims going through the situation here at Hope Store New Beginning Center, we know they know their situation way better than us. So we're not going to tell individuals just to leave their situations. Like just pack a bag and get yourself out of that situation, because we know it's not that simple. If it were, a lot of these victims would have left that relationship already. That power and control tactic that these perpetrators use again is and again the different reasons why a victim stays just play into this, why it doesn't just why breaking up with someone and just leaving isn't simple. We're gonna touch more about warning signs and what you can look out for, especially in others that you can pick out that they might be going through some form of abuse. But the more common ones would be bruises, cuts, or scratches. And in high school, when we're doing some of these presentations, I sometimes keep an eye out to see if maybe there's a student that's wearing that turtleneck sweater in the middle of summer, or just wearing that in like clothes that don't fit the current weather that we're going through. So if somebody's wearing all that kind of clothing to cover up in the middle of summer, that might be an indicator that something's going on. But being able to pick out on some of those again, maybe the bumps on someone's shin, cuts, or anything like that, just little things like that. Isolating someone, you can pick that up on maybe your coworker isn't showing up anymore to work. They've missed a few days when you know they were always on time, and they slowly start missing special occasions, or you were going to happy hour with them and they're no longer able to make it. They're making up excuses. That might be one of those indicators that, hey, there might be something going on and I should check up on this individual. Defensiveness, just not allowing you to get too close, or they back away from you. And I usually I connect this with the same way like an abused dog would act, because when you see an abused dog, they completely just close down, they back away, their head drops down, they tuck their tail between their legs, and they don't allow anyone to get that close to them, and they're always just backing away from them. So that's that same demeanor of defensiveness is what you can see in an individual that's actually going through that. Making excuses for their partner, or just justifying the forms of abuse that they're going through and putting the blame on themselves. Again, another one of the warning signs that you can see. Or maybe it might be the lack of self-care, when you start seeing again that this individual that you saw constantly always had their hair done, or always he or she always did their nails, they had makeup on, they always had fresh clothes that was ironed and it wasn't wrinkly. When you start seeing that, that's when you start seeing those small little warning signs that, okay, there might be something going on in this situation. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the safety planning. And individuals can start a small little basic safety planning for themselves, where they can take down a list of important documents like social security, maybe their birth certificate or their children's birth certificate. But ideally, it's always recommended that an individual that is trying to safely plan does this with a professional in a professional setting, just because we're able to in our organization, when we help individuals in that setting, we know that they know their situation the best, but we're able to provide other resources that they might not be aware of. So it's always good for them to go to an agency that they can provide that safety planning, so they can seek even more resources, because a victim might think there's not a lot of resources out there for them to help get them out of this situation once they're well and ready. But that's what agencies like the one I work for help in, to help get them out of that situation and prepare them rather, to get themselves out of that situation when they're good and ready. And here we have a list, and that ready bag that's listed up there. I mean, that's one of the things that would be a huge red flag for the perpetrator. And usually when somebody has a ready bag, you want to have it at a safe place. You don't want to have it like in the back of your car where the perpetrator can go through it, or in your closet. So there's plenty of steps that come into play when it comes to safety planning, initiating that safety plan. A victim needs to be really careful in that situation, because they don't want to give the perpetrator any hint that they're planning to leave that situation. So it really is important. And again, keeping copies of important documents like the driver's license, child's birth certificate, social security cards, passports, or even protective orders if any of them have been put into place. And again, those are important documents that maybe we don't, or rather that we don't want individuals to have to go back to the household and put themselves in that situation again. So the importance of safety planning is, so once they leave, they're gone for good, and it takes away any reason for them to have to go back to that household, because the last thing you want is this victim to think, okay, I forgot my phone charger, and now I know my victim's at work, so they're going to put themselves in that risk. Hey, I'm going to go back home, I'm just going to get this possession that I forgot that I really need. No, we don't. We want to scratch out all those little things. We want to make sure that, again, that they don't have any reason for them to go back. So that's when, so when we talk about safety planning, again, very important to help a victim in that situation. And just because we help an individual with a safety plan, it doesn't mean that they have to initiate it next month, next year, 2 years from now. It's when they're good and ready. There's no set timeline when it comes to that situation. Again, the victim themselves knows their situation better than we do. We just want to help them when it comes to that situation of setting that up and having all their eggs accounted for. We want to help in that process when where we're available to do so. Now, I added this section on here even just because I know maybe you're not the one going through abuse today, maybe, but maybe you know someone that is going through some form of abuse, and there's these well-intentioned errors that pop up that can cause more harm when trying to help these individuals. So we're going to talk about these very briefly. And one of the things you hear is boys will be boys. Now we know that the reason why that's something bad to say right there is because you're just brushing it off. It's like, well, this is what boys do, so it's expected from them. You don't want to feed into that mentality that this is what is expected from boys. No, because we're just giving that abuse just an excuse to continue. But everybody argues. It's like, yeah, people do argue, but people don't constantly belittle themselves in that situation. They don't, when it comes to having arguments, the end result is to compromise somewhere in there to resolve that argument. It's not, I need to win this argument regardless if I'm right or wrong. I'm going to win this argument. So everybody argues. Again, one of the things that we hear but we shouldn't, or that people say when trying to help others, but that can cause harm. It can't be that bad if he or she stays in that relationship. If it really was that bad, they would have left that relationship already. So again, downplaying the form of abuse that this victim might be going through, or it only happens to people from bad homes. One thing that we know about abuse is that it's regardless, it can affect anyone, regardless of age, gender, creed, sexual orientation, how much money they make, where they grew up. There's such thing as domestic abuse only affecting individuals from bad homes or poor neighborhoods. We know that's not true. It can affect anyone. But Another thing for that we see with well-intentioned errors is a form of victim blaming as well. It's like, so what did you say that made her so mad? What we did in that situation is we blamed the victim for the abuse that they ended up enduring in that situation. And that's something that we never do. We never want to make the victim feel like they're responsible for that abuse, that they're the root of the root cause of that abuse. So again, one of those um, well-intentioned errors that we see a lot. But like, you're too smart to fall for that. It's like, yeah, because it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm not abused by every single individual at that high school or at that college campus. That again, that feeds into causing that harm for these individuals, because why should it be my responsibility to not be abused by anyone? Shouldn't it be everyone's responsibility to not abuse individuals instead? So again, it it happens a lot to where we mean well, and we see individuals out there trying to help in those situations where they end up causing more harm. But just being aware of the way we approach those situations can really make a positive impact when it comes to helping out a victim. And they might not be ready to disclose or get help in at the current time, but again, it opens up that line of communication with these individuals that, hey, this is a person that isn't blaming me for what I went through. And when I'm finally well and ready, I'm going to come to them and see if they have any resources to help me get myself out of this situation. And a few more, just avoid him when he's in a bad mood. Should you ever be afraid of a potential partner or a significant other? Should you have to be walking on eggshells in that relationship? No, of course not. You should never have to be worried about what you have to say, or watch what you say in front of these individuals or your significant other, because that's not what a healthy relationship looks like. It should be perfectly fine to be in the household with this individual, no matter what mood they might be in. If you're in a bad mood and you know that this individual loses it once they're mad, they might start getting physical, getting very verbal in those situations. That's not something that you should be that should be your concern in that situation, because that's more on them. They have to learn to deal with their emotions in that situation in a positive manner. We all get upset, we all get angry, we all get stressed in that situation, but it's how we cope with those emotions. So that isn't something we really can justify when talking to a victim. Just avoid them when they're in that situation. It's not something that helps. Again, why don't you just leave one of the more hurtful ones? Because if it was that easy, this individual would have left that situation already. Again, they know their safety better than you do, better than I do. So they're gonna do what they need to do to help get themselves out of that situation when they're well and ready. And the best thing that we can do for them is just being supportive of them, believing them when they come to us with that information, and just not judging them. Like, it lets them know that someone cares, someone's there for me. So uh, we talked we knocked out a few of these just now. I didn't put up the slide, but again, being supportive, non-judgmental when a survivor does reach out to you, letting know that you believe in them, maintaining that contact with them, because again, making sure that they don't become isolated is something that is going to be really helpful for them. It lets them know that there's someone out there. So you want to make sure you continue that contact, even if it's not as much as you would like. A little, just giving them a little glimmer of hope is enough to potentially get them to seek those resources that are going to help save them and get them out of that situation. Um, Letting them know that and it helps them let them know that they're not alone, that there's someone out there in that situation. But if they're really in that danger where they need immediate help, there's always 911 to help them in that situation. And police officers do a lethality assessment when they respond to calls of domestic violence, and they do that assessment, and it helps classify this individual to see let them know how likely they are of losing their life to this potential partner. And if they fall under that category where they score high under that lethality assessments are. Um, they connect this individual to a domestic violence agency, and they let them know that they try and make that connection with an agency to potentially help them in that situation. So that might be another route that they can go, because some individuals might be afraid to call 911 because maybe they're here illegally and they're worried that if they call 911 they're gonna call immigration, they're gonna get them sent back to their home country, and that might be something, again, one of the reasons why an individual stays. But letting them know that the police officers there, they're there to make sure that they're well, that they're that they're fine when it comes to this physical abuse. And if we're able to link them, if they're able to link them to agencies like ours, that's the best outcome that we can have from that. And just letting them know that there's plenty of resources out there that we can help them. And again, they might not know what these resources are, but calling an agency like ours, there's numerous agencies here in the DFW area that help with situations, or rather help victims of domestic violence. And we work together. We have a coalition where we work together. So we stay connected in that situation. So we aren't keeping victims like, oh, these are our victims that we're working with, you can't have them. If we don't have room for them, we're going to work with other organizations to help get them the help that they need in the situation, whether it be shelter, food, and other resources. But I see it's getting close to our time. But I want to touch just put a slide up here real quick for the resources, because I noticed I forgot my introduction video where we touch on the resources, but I just have a list of them up here for you. And some of the things that we offer are the victims of domestic abuse are 24/7 hotline answered both in English and in Spanish. And they can, if they have any questions and if they need any information of our services, this is somewhere that they can call. We have emergency shelter for them. We have food and care for them available at those shelters. And I have a few images of what the shelters look like here in the next two slides. But we also have consulting or counseling for adults. We also have play therapy for children as well. We have legal support that can help them with those situations as well. Have housing assistance, case management, a resource store that with that resource stores, any of the proceeds that we make, any of the donations in there, the money we make from there goes back into making sure that all these different resources that we have available stay free to these victims, because we don't ever want them to have to pay for anything or have to worry about that. Maybe $5 for that counseling case is too much. I'd rather use that $5 to feed my kids. So we want to make sure we can take out any barriers that'll prevent them from coming and seeking these resources, like just out the table. And in our resource store also, when we work with with victims that are in our housing, maybe they left their abusive situation and came straight to our shelters and they don't have clothes for themselves or their kids. Our resource store helps them with that situation where they can go and pick out a few particles of clothing to help themselves, so they can have something instead of just what they came into the shelter with. And then we have abuse education and prevention, the department I work for. And we also do have the BIP program. And in this BIP program, this is actually the only program that we have that's required to be paid for. And this is for the perpetrators. And we get a lot of concerns like, well, why are you working with the perpetrators as well? It's like, because we know if we just worry about the victims and just help the victims get themselves out of the situation, and we let the perpetrators continue that abusive cycle, they're just going to find a new victim to abuse. So we're trying to stop that cycle as well. And I just wanted to post up a little few pictures of what our shelters look like. So they're pretty, they look like houses. They're very roomy. They have beds, playgrounds for the kids and everything. They have access to the dinner tables, to the stoves, to the fridges, which are all kept with food and everything. So they have access to all that. These are Plano ones. So they're very beautiful shelters. And in the first thing I would think of a shelter would be like different cots stacked together. So in like a gym setting, but no, this is a very nice looking shelters, and we have 44 beds in total for families seeking that shelter. And we do also help men in that situation, but we house them in a hotel instead, because we don't want to re-traumatize women in our house setting. So our shelters, these two, the Plano and the Garland one, are for our women and children in that setting. But that does conclude our webinar, and I just have my contact info up there, and I'm gonna launch the poll, which again, it is anonymous. And this poll that popped up right now is more for myself, and when we report our numbers. And again, anonymous, just feel free to fill that one out. And again, for those of you that needed CEUs, at the end when we close this down, it's gonna pop up with another link, and it's gonna have all that information for the CEU. But aside from that, I'm just gonna open up the floor. If anyone has any questions, anything we can clear up or discuss real quick, please feel free. Feel free to just write down questions down in the chat box, and we can get that taken care of. But if not, thank you everyone for joining me today. I hope you were able to take some valuable information from today's webinar.